Everyone. So the first thing I want to do is just really give us all an overview of how we're going to run the session to give you those markers. And what we want to start off with is give us some sort of context of why we think in this area it's so important to get this right and why we're so passionate about it. And then really to open up the discussion with everyone here to say, look, what at the moment are you noticing that's really working when it comes to effective leadership development? What's sticking and sustaining itself? What are you noticing are the common traps, some of the challenges you're facing? Then we want to hone in onto the three design principles. There are more, but there are three that we think are really critical, which I think can move things on really effectively when it comes to developing a program that lasts beyond the people in the room having the training experience. It sustains itself. And then finally, we want to drill down into a core skill because, that's what it's all about, the skills. And we're going to get you to try stuff out with us. And for me, it illustrates why an emphasis on skills in leadership development is so much more preferable to an emphasis on knowledge acquisition, because it's so much easier to just sit there and absorb information and say you now know about leadership. The acid test is when you actually have to put it into practice, and you're encouraged to do that, albeit within a safe environment, a psychologically safe environment. So that's what we want to cover. And I guess the first thing to say is that organizations spend a lot of money on leadership development, a lot of time and a lot of effort. And yet, really, really good leadership, as opposed to okay leadership, is still relatively rare. Whereas on the other side of the coin, unfortunately, poor or ineffective leadership can be still surprisingly common. So for me, the question is, facing up to that reality and asking ourselves, is it because it's just beyond the reach of people to be very, very highly skilled leaders? Those skills are just not really obtainable for most. Or is it, in fact, our approach to how we develop leaders? And I guess it's that reality we want to look at, dig down in, look at why that might be, and actually what we can all do about it. So that's the premise for this. And I'm going to hand over to Shona just to give us a little bit more context.
Brilliant. Thank you, Simon. Building on what Simon is saying about leaders and being okay leaders or great leaders or even outstanding or excellent leaders, we want to show you a graph. And this is some research that has been done by Zenger and Folkman. And this is based on over 20 years of findings. And we'll just briefly talk through what the graph summarizes. And as you can see, it says the top 10%. And those top percent of leaders, as rated by their teams, have twice as much impact on their team's performance than the other 90%. And at MF, we're really not content with leaving that statistic hanging. So we must ensure that more than 1 in 10 leaders, or some other research even suggests that it's 1 in 20 people and leaders out there are just good, but we want to get people into that great aspect, to that top 10%. And as you can see by the graph, you'll notice the plateau. And what happens when you have new leaders at the start of the graph? People are finding out what leadership means to them. They're developing their skills, their muscles in leadership, their capabilities and confidence. And as that starts to develop, you'll notice a plateau of good leaders. And that plateau can be down to many different reasons. It can be because people think, okay, I'm good at leadership now, and that's it. They stay in their comfort zone rather than push themselves to a higher standard of continuously learning, continuously developing that skill set that they need to develop themselves and other people around them. And that's what really pushes them into the top percent. So they expect higher standards of not only themselves, but other people. So that's the graph that we want to show. Just for reflection, it might be helpful for you to think where you sit on this graph, and also to think about where leaders in your organization sit on this curve of the graph as well.
we asked people to have a reflection on what are some of the challenges that you currently face in getting this to really stick. And Hugh brilliantly put together a Padlet, didn't you? Which I had not actually heard of before you told me. And I think we had some really good responses for time. And again, I refer back to the Q&A afterwards. We're just going to pick a couple of these, which really resonated, but they're all really important. And I can see they're coping with coasting. A lot of people I work with have been there and done it. And interestingly, that came up a little bit yesterday for me when doing the training. And I go back to that notion. I know it's a little bit easy to say, but it's another thing to do. But the point of the matter is, it's very easy to coast in a training room where you don't have to engage. You maybe ask the odd question, maybe do a little group exercise to discuss things and review. But what you're not asked to do is to step up and give it a go. And I think the moment, in the nicest possible way, when you focus on skills, as long as you create that psychological safety and that sense you can try stuff out, there's no right or wrong, in the nicest possible way, there's nowhere to hide when you have to do stuff and get feedback. So getting people used to doing stuff and feedback, even though it can feel a little bit challenging, I think it moves people away pretty quickly from the coasting. But you have to be sensitive, clearly, to what people's constraints are and where they're prepared to go. But if you do it well enough, I think inch by inch, slowly by slowly, people will start to take on stuff and do things. So the coasting can be negated by the doing, I think.
Yeah. One that I'm seeing, Simon, is around I haven't got time for this. And this is a consistent theme as well that I notice and that we notice in our work, of people saying, you know, we work in a really fast-paced business. And I don't know any organisation that would say we work in a really slow-paced business. I think everyone works in that fast-paced business. It's just a given. And how we can be really intentional and deliberate in carving out that time. And it reminded me of a session that I was running actually this morning, and what they've done to ensure that there's time for it is make it part of their culture principles, so that it's expected that you carve out this time. So again, setting the standard that we'll make time for it because it's a priority. And although short term, it will feel like a lot of time, longer term, not only for yourself, but also for the other people that work with you, it's going to reap the benefits and rewards as well. So making sure that there is time to do this and getting people on board as well.
Yeah, and Shona, sorry to interrupt, just very briefly, where we're going to common traps. I think it's quite important to show a little bit of vulnerability yourself as the facilitator, the trainer, to say, look, there's lots of stuff I don't get right under pressure. And when you show people it's okay not to be perfect and to have areas you need to continuously develop, I think people bring down those barriers about who are you to tell me, because you show it's okay. Anyone needs to keep learning.
Yeah, definitely. And these are some of the most common traps that we recognise. And indeed, as we're going through these, if you can pop in the chat as well, some of the other common traps that people will fall into. One of the first ones is not holding senior leaders to a high standard or a high account. And I was running a session probably the mid last year, and it was the CEO of the company, and everyone was getting really stuck in and engaged and were having those culture conversations. And I noticed that he was on the sideline, and I just quietly gave him some feedback and said that it would be helpful for him to join in those conversations to set that standard so that he can hold himself to a higher account, because they already held him to a higher account to it as well. So when we really set people to a higher account. The next one is assuming leaders have an accurate self-assessment of their effectiveness. Some leaders are great and have that higher sort of EQ and that emotional intelligence, and other leaders aren't as self-aware. And so, as Simon says, that point around feedback, always making sure that the leader, and there's opportunities for people to have feedback on the skills that are needed to take them into that top 10%. And you can do that both verbally, there might be assessments and sort of questionnaires that you would do to help leaders in that journey. The third point is not only developing knowledgeable leaders, but skilled leaders. And there are people that go, I've read this book, I've read that book, I've read this book. And while that is great, it's around making sure that there is the opportunity to practice these skills so that it becomes outside of the room, that actually we're bringing it to life and that real practical element of it. The next one is the laissez-faire approach. So if they don't want to engage, I can't do anything about that. And it comes back to the point you were saying, Rodrigo, around how can you tell me what to do? I don't need to do anything about this at that moment. And we have to engage people, because if we don't engage people in that journey, they'll stay with the organization and nothing will change. Those bad habits will carry on. And the last common track we notice is not measuring long-term impact. So building in intentionally those interjections or inventions that help make the training sustainable, so that there's always that common goal and learning point of building and increasing people's skill sets and knowledge around it. So those are just some of the common traps around what's currently not working.
Great, thank you so much. So we just thought we would focus in on 3 design principles that we've given thought to around what gives us the best chance of maximizing our impact when it comes to leadership development. And I think the first thing is we've got to excite people around the whole notion of learning and developing their skills. And there are a number of ways we can do that. The first thing, we keep talking about the skills versus the knowledge and the theories and models, but I think a lot of people can get really quite confused, and it's all very theoretical and difficult to pinpoint what leadership really is when it's presented to you in those kind of theories. So what we like to do is what we think is really important is to simplify the principles into something that's tangible, so people can actually see and hear what that would look like if you were deploying a particular approach to leadership. For example, the moment people can start to see, well, actually, good leadership might be about the ability to clearly articulate a vision or present an argument clearly, to listen at a deeper level, to ask questions that unlock people's potential, to have really honest and open conversations which get to the heart of the matter. When people can actually start to say, so that actually that's the behavior that would help me to be better in this area of leadership, I think then they can start to benchmark themselves against what really good leadership looks like and where they are. And what, in fact, really engages people is when they surprisingly find that they're very good at some things, and they get feedback in the moment in a training session on what they're doing. So that feedback is so essential. And then they're more open then to that gap around what could I do more of, because they can see what that would look like. And then of course the next thing, what we believe exciting them, is then to give them a go and have a go and realize that they're not so bad after all, and they can do this, and it's okay to not be perfect. The other thing is, and I know it's really obvious, but there's something about, we've got to be authentically, of course, passionate about the subject and express that and have a real desire to want to make a difference. As I say, it needs to be authentic and real. And I think the moment people feel that off you, they know, and it's important to carry out, that you're prepared to adapt a training session, for example, according to the needs of the people in the room. Because so often people just deliver generic off-the-shelf training. And the moment people know that you will adapt and personalize your approach, that's, I think, really exciting. And the other thing is, I know it's been mentioned, creating that psychological safety so people can try stuff out and, in a very basic way, have fun. I mean, people have got to feel that they can have fun and it's positive. I think that really helps the whole learning process and excites people. So that's our first design principle.
Yeah. The second design principle, and we've touched on this already in terms of that practicing element. I won't call it role play, I won't call it real play, but the demo, or getting to really practice the skills aspect of it, so that it lifts it from not just being theory, but the practical element of it. So we try to make it as experiential as possible with lots of opportunity to practice. We might say, stop, do that bit again, and that there's real live feedback in the moment that is both positive and constructive for that developmental aspect. And as Simon said, it leads in to make it. I was running a session last week and someone said, I hate when someone says, you know, we're going to have a really fun day. I prefer to say we're going to have a really enjoyable day. So again, just tailoring it to who's in the room with you, but making sure it's experiential and there's lots of feedback and practice within it. So that makes it stick. One of the things that I was running a session this morning, and with the practicing demo that we did, someone said, I remember the demo in my mind. I remembered that practice element. And then it kicked in my muscle of how I should start to have the conversation. They were given a feedback conversation. So these little things just stick with us and they're there. And then it kicks back into what we need to do when that situation arises.
Great, yes. And then the third design principle is around this demanding excellence from the word go, and expecting that people will change as a result of the training, and then backing up that. And we talked about it a lot today already. It's come up a lot. What happens after the training session has ended is really just the beginning of the process. So there are 3 design principles. And again, we can explore this in Q&A as well. So just to change the energy and focus, what we thought we'd do, we said at the beginning that we'd focus in on a skill, and we want to model those design principles with you. And let's test what's possible when it comes to focusing on a particular skill. We call them micro skills because they're little components that put together as building blocks start to become very effective means of enhancing leadership. And we're looking at effective influencing here. So I'll explain this and then we're going to demo it. And then we're going to give you, in the comfort of breakout rooms, a chance to explore this as a skill yourselves. So it's personal status, something we talk quite a lot about here. And you can see this arrow going up and down. I did say to Hugh that after a while it might hypnotize me. So I have to be slightly careful. But the idea here with personal status is that we're not talking about hierarchy within an organization. We're just talking about how someone will bring together body language, vocal tone, and the choice of words to hit a certain mark when it comes to confidence or a sense of authority, or indeed actually dropping their status on a scale of 1 to 10. So if you were thinking, it's very simple as a visual, but it really works. So if someone was operating at a low status, let's say a 1 or a 2, that would be showing itself, as I said, in their vocal tone, their body language, the words they choose to use or not use. And as they go up, you would expect to see a shift in those 3. So just to often talk about, there's too much, feels inauthentic, too little feels inauthentic, and enough is where you want to be at any given moment. And it's a great phrase, which is, if you can manifest the phrase in how you behave, I don't want to be anywhere else talking to anyone else about anything else, that gives you the right energy. Another thing is the ability to express what you're saying in terms of think to speak, not speak to think. So when people are speaking to think, they're finding what they want to say out loud, and it really gets very confusing and it lowers the status. Whereas when people are more confident, you notice very subtly, they're editing what they're going to say. So only what comes out of their mouth is what needs to be said. So all these things we try to help people to focus in on. And at first it feels clunky, and at first it doesn't feel particularly real. It's not about acting. It's about bringing those 3 factors together to create the right level of status. And one last thing I would say is that when people get stuck at very high status or very low status, that's the problem, because they're not able to shift and adapt to people. And they're very noticeable when people come across like that. And we all know people like that. So that's just giving you some context for status. And I'm just going to hand over to Shona just to summarize what we said.
Yeah, so a brief summary of what we said. So we noticed when we're lower status, so at that level 1 or 2, maybe even 3 around avoiding eye contact, fidgeting. There might be a relaxed tone in our voice. So it really is a combination of the body language and vocal tone. It then uses that into the words that we produce. So as Simon said, sort of apologizing for our very existence in life. And then it leaks into our energy. So the energy and the words that we use, so they might be self-deprecating. And the best leaders that we work with are able to adapt their status depending on the situation, whether they increase it or lower it. And again, if you think about status on a scale of 1 to 10, so 1 where status is low, and then 10 where status is really high. So as Simon said, what we want to do is just test this out a little bit. So I'll hand over to Hugh.
Thank you, Shona. I'm going to help you out by just setting up this conversation, really. So Simon and Shona are going to have a conversation, and we're going to be in control of their status levels. And it might be a little bit frenetic and chaotic, but let's have some fun and let's try it out. So what we'd like you to do is, in the chat, once they start talking, please feel free to just put a number in. You could say Shona 8 or Simon 3. Put that in the chat, and I'm going to see where it's heading. You know, I'm going to try to judge where people would like each of the speakers to go. And they'll change their status, sometimes overtly, and sometimes quite subtly. So watch out for those subtle changes in body language, vocal tone, those kind of things that that might be going on. Giving a number, I'm going to give you, Shona, 3. And I'm going to give you, Simon, 8.
Great. Okay, Shona, so we did the presentation together with the client. There's a bit of feedback I want to give you just around where I think your hesitancy may have put the client off. And so let's talk about that. Let's debrief that, and I can give you some feedback. Sorry, Shona, you were saying?
No, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
You didn't mean to interrupt me. Okay, that's great. So, yeah, it's all done in good taste, because I just really want to make you feel that you're able to do things as best you can.
Simon, down to 3, please. Simon, 3.
Although, I mean, really, in many ways, I was worse than you, I suppose.
No, I was terrible, and I feel awful around sort of putting that burden on you.
No. But would you
Shona,
mind?
up to 7, Shona.
So Simon, actually, I wanted to give you a little bit of feedback.
Please do. I deserve it.
Yes, and there are so many things that you could have done differently, and
I know
it's just a bit of a struggle on choosing.
Simon, 1, Simon.
In fact, I don't think I can ever do it again. I honestly really feel, and I want to be really honest with you, that I feel that you should just do the whole thing.
I think you should do it again, Simon, but there's definitely some work on.
I don't,
so let's work together.
Say again, Hugh. I was so low status, I didn't hear you.
Shona, this is for Shona, 8.
8. So Simon, I mean, where do we start? I think it's probably best. There are a couple of work-ons. I'll give you 3 things that I'd appreciate if you implement.
Of course.
And then if you work on those 3 areas of development for the next presentation that we deliver together, it'll be really helpful. Otherwise, it's going to be really difficult for us to work together again.
Hugh, you're on mute.
Both 5, please. Both 5.
So
yeah, Shona, look, can I just say that I personally feel that in anything like this, we are bound to both have look at areas where we can improve, because that's the whole point of doing it, isn't it? Reviewing and giving each other feedback, but also, can I just say, I think we also did a really good job in that presentation with the client too.
Yeah, we did. It was a good job. We can definitely both improve, and we had some real strengths that shone through in those moments.
Absolutely.
So, turn it up to 11, Simon.
11 is going beyond my call of duty. Thank you very much, but I will go to 11. Shona, the idea here really is we're both fantastic. We're going to motivate people. We're going to bring people along with us. And next time we engage with that client, not only are they going to be wowed by us, they're going to pay a huge amount of money for us to drive things forward.
And last number change, 8, both of you, 8, please.
Shona, go for it.
I think we did a great job overall. There's definitely some improvements and we can work on them for the next times. It's minor adjustments that we can make. The team seemed to be really happy. The skills element flourished in, and we did a great job of making sure that there was enough time for people to practice.
Yeah, I was going to say that, Shona. I think the idea was that we gave room for practice and people to ask questions, and that was really critical. Absolutely. I was just going to say, Hugh, it's all about the circumstance and what's needed in that situation, isn't it? And what's needed from each other. I go back to that ability to adapt to the moment. There's definitely times when you need to drop your status because you want to give more confidence to other people, frankly, and maybe they're the expert. And actually, a little bit of humility and being humble is appropriate as a really great leader. In fact, I think it's essential. And then there's another time and a place when you step up and show that level of confidence and authority that takes people with you. So thank you so much for that. I'm aware we haven't got a